We're not as good friends. If you wrote all these down.
You chose to sit there. I didn't see you. Process and you were interrupted. Oh gosh.
Well, I was yeah. No, I actually dropped her off.
We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's conversation with Governor Asa Hutchinson. I'm Daniel Bennett. I'm an associate professor of political science at John Brown University and director at the Center for Faith and Flourishing, the sponsor for tonight's event. The Center for Faith and Flourishing was founded in 2019 thanks to the generous support of an anonymous donor here in Arkansas, as well as the efforts of the center's inaugural director, Dr. Jay Bruce. CFF provides students, experts, and practitioners a means of addressing some of today's most pressing questions and to promote and encourage enriching conversations at the intersection of faith, public life and the well-being of of individuals, neighborhoods, and communities. At the heart of our mission is the belief that individual and collective flourishing is best realized in a free society marked by a commitment to liberty, the marketplace of ideas, and democratic citizenship. In addition to hosting public events like this one, CFF is grateful to support student and community learning efforts of all sorts, from hosting reading groups and colloquia to supporting student travel to national and international conferences. Before introducing Governor Hutchinson, a quick word on the schedule for tonight's event. We'll begin with some opening remarks from the governor, followed by a couple of questions from the stage, as it is. And we'll then turn to your questions for the governor, which I've confirmed at dinner tonight is his favorite part of the evening. So you can submit these questions via slido.com using the event code 4097876. You can find that information on the above screen, and you can also scan the QR code to take you directly to the submission page. I'll be monitoring these questions throughout the evening, so feel free to send them my way as they come to you. And now to introduce our speaker. Asa Hutchinson was the 46th governor of Arkansas from 2015 to 2023. He served in various levels and branches of government in over 4 decades of public service. In 1982, President Reagan appointed him as U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Arkansas. In 1996, he won the first of 3 terms in the United States House of Representatives. During his 3rd term in Congress, President George W. Bush appointed him Director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and later as an Undersecretary in the Department of Homeland Security. In 2013, he won his first race for governor with 55% of the vote and was reelected in 2018 with more than 65% of the vote. In this last election, he received more votes than any other candidate for governor in the state's history. Governor Hutchinson grew up on a small farm in Gravette, Arkansas, just up the road. He is a graduate of Bob Jones University and the University of Arkansas School of Law. He and his wife, Susan, have been married for over 50 years. They have 4 children and several grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Governor Asa Hutchinson. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. It is great to be on the campus of John Brown University again and to be back here. And I want to recognize President Pollard for a wonderful reception that we had earlier. And it's a delight to be back here. And for the students that are here, what a terrific university in which you can get a great education with a Christian perspective. And that is important in today's society. And so, Dr. Pollard, thank you again for not just today, but I've enjoyed the opportunity to get to know you through 8 years as governor in that time, and then on through the present. And I do have a connection here. The fact that my sister, Jerry, graduated from John Brown University. The fact that actually is mentioned that I grew up in Gravette, which was right down the road. And so my story of faith began actually through the ministry of John Brown University. And that is whenever I was in my early years in Gravette, probably about the 5th grade, I was joined a group called Giant Fighters at the local church. And guess what? It was Bruce Long, who was a student at John Brown University that was pastoring part-time our church. He had one arm. He lost it in a farming accident in Kansas, I believe it was. And he was working with us sweaty boys, building go-karts, playing football. Yes, he could do that. And every day he was a little bit sneaky with us, though. He would have us come in and he would have us, of course, for prizes, memorize a verse of scripture. And so it was Romans 3:23, for all have sinned. Romans 6:23, the next week, for the wages of sin is death. And then pretty soon it snuck up on us that he was teaching us the Romans road of salvation. And of course, that's whenever I trusted Jesus as my Savior, is through the ministry of John Brown University. That started my life of faith and great memories. And by the way, one of the joys of running for president, you get to reconnect with people. So I'm out in Arizona, and guess who calls into a radio station that I'm doing a talk show on? That's Bruce Long, who led me to the Lord. So it becomes a small world, connected, and particularly whenever you start with that life of faith. And I'm also delighted to have my bride, Susan, here of 50 years. And she's been a great part of this journey, both in the successes and in the challenges. And we met at college, Bob Jones. And whenever we got serious about our relationship, I brought her to Arkansas for the first time. And I took her to the Spavinaw Creek, where my old farm was. We didn't own it anymore, but we went out there, and it was in Thanksgiving time, and we had an early snow. And I wanted to show her Jesse James' hideout, which might not have been Jesse James' hideout, but it was to me. And that's where we played. That's where my childhood was. And whenever we got to the Spavinaw Creek, it was snowing, it was cold, but I took off my shoes and carried her across the Spavinaw Creek. And she fell in love with me, I think, but most importantly, she fell in love with Arkansas at that time. So she's been an incredible first lady of our state. I'm glad that she has joined us here as well. You know, if you look at my life story that started here, my mom and dad had high school educations. They were blue collar. My dad was a poultry inspector for Peterson Farms, and then later Tyson's. He inspected chickens. He convinced me to go to college whenever he took me into the kill room at the processing plant. And he said, you got options in life. And even though they only had high school educations, they understood the importance of education. And so they inspired us. I was the youngest of 6 to make sure I had a path to college. And, you know, I was telling the young people earlier that sometimes you have a plan in life that you know exactly what you're going to do. Well, for me, I didn't have a plan that I wanted to be governor of Arkansas. I didn't have a plan that I even wanted to practice law or to be in Congress. I had a plan to make sure I took advantage of the day, learned all that I could, and see where that path led. And to me, that's an important step in life. And so whenever I went to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I picked accounting as my major because it was the first major listed alphabetically in the catalog. I was an accounting major, and for 4 years, got my accounting degree. But in my senior year, I was in debate. And actually, that's where Susan and I met. But debate was a constitutional question that took me to Clemson Law School, where I read cases and I said, forget accounting, I'm in love with the law. And so I went to law school planning on practicing law in Bentonville around the square, which I did. And through that path of life, things changed for me. And one of the questions tonight is, how does your life of faith impact your public service? Well, first of all, it drew me to public service. I didn't plan it, but God puts us on this planet to be a good steward of the talents that he gives to us and the opportunities that he gives to us. And we want to make a difference to our neighbors and to our communities. And everybody has a different way to impact. Well, for me, as a lawyer, it's helping clients. That has eternal value. Helping people through difficult times, being a good counselor to them. And then I stood and I looked at the political arena and I said, that is an opportunity to impact our community, to make life better for others and to help people. And so that drew me into the political arena. And so it begins with a life of faith. And when I was in law school, I reconnected with Susan. I had written her a Dear Susie letter. It said, you're going to be in South Carolina. She's from Georgia. I'm going to be here. Bye-bye. And she said, no, you're not going to have any of that. And so she went to Memphis, as close as she wanted to get. And we reconnected, and I started hitchhiking back and forth to see her. Now, that is the short version of our story. Do not ask her, because you'll get the long version. But that is the path that we started out. And it's a path that we shared in faith. And whenever I was a lawyer in Bentonville, we started the first Christian school in Benton County. We started a radio station, and we put John MacArthur on there and Charles Swindoll, and we said, let's have it as a ministry, even though it's for a profit station. And so whatever place you have in life, you can make a difference. For me, it was the law, and then it became the public arena. And I want to give this challenge to you. It's a quote that I like. It's a quote that I have framed in my office. And it says, it's from Martin Luther, the reformer Martin Luther. And he said, the very ablest youth should be reserved and educated, not for the office of preaching, but for government. Because in preaching, the Holy Spirit does it all. Whereas in government, one must exercise reason in the shadowy realms where ambiguity and uncertainty are the order of the day. And that, to me, might be confusing to some who says, how can that be? A lawyer, a politician, how can that be a high calling of God? Well, I believe that we serve the cause of justice and the principles of justice. And if you do that, whether as a lawyer, as in public service, or as a legislator, or as a whole, or it might just be in your community, if we serve the cause of justice, then we are pretty close to the habitation of God. Because Scripture says that justice is the habitation of God's throne. In other words, He lives and breathes justice. And so that path started out in the law. It led me to be appointed by President Reagan as the youngest U.S. attorney in the nation. It took me to the hills of Arkansas to negotiate the surrender of a terrorist group and successfully prosecute them. It took me into Congress, where I served 3 administrations. It took me into the Bush administration as head of the DEA, all challenging posts with incredible opportunities to serve and to make a difference in Homeland Security after the 9/11 attack. Of all of the positions that I've had, though, let me tell you, there's not a better job than being governor of Arkansas. I want to thank you for the opportunity to serve this state for 8 years and to serve this district in the United States Congress. It was a joy. It was a privilege. And before we have questions tonight, which I look forward to, and I hope you'll have many of those, I wanted to address the question as, how has my faith guided me through the challenges that I faced in the different roles, and particularly as governor? And first of all, I would say that my faith gave me perspective in what I was doing and in my arena of service. When I was in Congress, I had tough votes, and I tried to make the best judgment that I could. I prayed about those. I worried about those. I don't worry much, but I thought about them a lot, and I listened to constituents. I had one particularly tough vote that I made. And as I was flying back to Arkansas, it was when the route was, we didn't have a direct flight, so I went through the St. Louis airport. And in the St. Louis airport, I saw John Ashcroft, who was in the United States Senate. Good friend, good believer, and good mentor of mine. And I said, John, I just took this vote, and I'm not sure how history is going to view that vote that I took. And he said, Asa, Don't worry about the judgment of history. Worry about the judgment of eternity. And that's what is the perspective that your life of faith gives you, is that we're accountable for us, not just now, but in eternity. And you make those decisions, look in the long view, and you think about how contradictory that is to the world of politics. Because in politics, it's what did you do for me lately, not what are you doing for eternity. And so there's some contradictions in the life of faith, but that's how it impacts you. And I think it impacts you obviously in the right direction. My life of faith guided me through the challenges because when it came to the tough decisions, it kept you humble and in prayer. It makes you understand the words of Scripture that says the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man or person availeth much. And prayer makes a difference. And the most encouraging words I ever heard in public life was when someone came up to me and said, Asa, we're praying for you. Our governor, we're praying for you. Congressman, we're praying for you. Those words of encouragement, those words of putting life in perspective really made a difference in how I performed and how I made decisions, and it keeps you humble as well. Whenever it came to the pandemic as governor, in March of 2020, our first case came up from New Orleans. Somebody from Pine Bluff decided to go to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. They came back and they had coronavirus and it spread. And I knew exactly what I was going to do on the first day. I was declaring an emergency. I was going to have a news conference. I was going to communicate to Arkansas what steps we should take. But the fact is, there was fear. There was the unknown. There was no test. There was no vaccine. There was people dying, and you'd already seen it in Washington State and in New York, and now it's in Arkansas. And so whenever there's no answers and whenever you don't even know the right questions to ask, it humbles you and you pray. And one of the best things that I did early on during that pandemic was simply to call for a day of prayer in the state of Arkansas and issue a proclamation as governor. And I remember that in my daily news conference, I first had Rex Horn, former pastor of mine. I asked him to come up and pray for our state. And he did. He called us to prayer. That's important, to have that humility and understanding of your reliance upon a sovereign God as you serve in these different positions. We made good decisions. We made bad decisions during the pandemic, but I'll just tell you 2 good decisions I think we made. One of them was that spring, no one wanted to go to school, and so everybody went virtual that spring, if you remember, in 2020. And it didn't work. Our child abuse cases went up. Our difficulty in learning went up. Our rural communities did not have internet access, so you couldn't learn. And I looked at this and I said, this is not how we're going to start next year. And I said, we're going to have school. Sure enough, I had protests out in front of the mansion, teachers in coffins saying, you're killing us. And I stuck with it, even though nationally the cases went up and nationally the schools closed. I said, we're going to keep our schools open with in-classroom instruction, with teachers in the classroom. And while it was challenging and difficult, teachers did an incredible job. One of the statistics I'm proud of through the pandemic was that the studies show that Arkansas ranked number 2 in the nation in terms of days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic. And that was important for our socialization, for our mental health, and for our recovery in terms of our studies. The other decision that was really tough, and it shows that sometimes you just have to go against the grain, and that is the pressure nationally to close down your businesses, to shelter in place. And even President Trump and Vice President Pence said in April, let's have 30 days in April, shut it down, and let's slow the spread. of the coronavirus. I'll never forget a call the National Governor Association hosted with President Trump on the line and Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia on the line. And President Trump is chewing out Governor Kemp because he opened up the tattoo parlors. And it was just one of those ironic, a little bit funny anecdotes from that time, but it shows the pressure to close down. And we were getting letters from businesses saying, please, Governor, let us be an essential business, because essential businesses get to stay home and non-essential businesses have to close. I thought about it. I prayed about it. I considered it. I listened to people, the health experts and others. And I said, I'm not going to make that distinction. If you are an essential, if you are providing a job for a family, that in my book, you're an essential business, and we're not going to shut you down. And we took a lot of national heat, national pressure on that, but we did it. And the result was that our economy recovered quicker, people had jobs, and I think it was the right decision. Your faith is an anchor that steadies your life. And elective public service is not a meritocracy. I want all the young people to understand that. We like meritocracies, but always the best person does not win in the world of politics. And I'd like to think that in every election that I ran, every campaign I ran, that one, God led me into it. Secondly, I was the best candidate for it. And then thirdly, when I lost, I would learn something from it. And guess what? I lost a few political races on my path to being governor of Arkansas. I lost my first race for governor in 2006. And whenever that happens, it not only humbles you, but you have to have an anchor in your soul that gives you a eternal perspective, that gives you a perspective that God has moved you in a different direction. Young people ask about getting into politics, and I tell them, follow your passions, but make sure you have multiple passions, and don't put all your passion into one arena, such as politics. It's not healthy for you. And for me, the passion is justice, the passion is the law, but it could be piano, it could be art, it could be ministry in different ways. And politics is so all-consuming. Make sure you are balanced in the passions that you pursue. The fourth thing I would say is that your faith enhances your joy of service. Your faith enhances your joy of service. I saw the impact that policy decisions have on people. Computer science education in Arkansas. Whenever we implemented that, we had 1,100 students, and all of a sudden, after my time as governor, we had 25,000 students. Today, 37,000 students taking computer science that gave them more opportunities in life. Policy impacts lives. But you know, it's also what is more rewarding is the individual connection that you have with people through the realm of public service. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in the 5th grade in Gravette, we had a project in which you would write a letter. You'd pick a state and do a report on the state. The state that I picked was Pennsylvania. I wrote the governor, I wrote the Chamber of Commerce, and I said, send me information on Pennsylvania. They did. I wrote a report. So when I became governor, all of a sudden I'm getting these letters from 5th graders from all over the country. Tell us about Arkansas. And I said, I was in that position, so I want to sign every letter to 5th graders. And I did, and one of the letters came from a Carol out of Dallas, Texas. And I sent her my personal letter back with some information on Arkansas. She gets it, and she's real excited. She shares it with her parents. She goes to school. I got a letter from the governor of Arkansas thinking everybody else got one from their state. She realized that didn't happen. So she goes back home, and she tells her parents that whenever we have spring break, I want to go to Arkansas and meet the governor of Arkansas. And so all of a sudden, right in the middle of the legislative session, my administrative assistant comes into my office and says, Governor, there's a girl named Carol out here with her parents, and they act like they're on a mission from God to meet you. I brought them in, put her in the governor's chair. And that's an impact that I had as governor, which gives you such joy because you're a person of faith and understand that it is those small touches in life that impact people for a long time. And so the joy of service is just multiplied whenever you're walking in that walk of faith. And then finally, your faith gives you greater hope for the future. Greater hope for the future. And today, we have challenges with foster care. We have challenges with those coming out of prison, looking for a second chance in life. I started the Restore Hope Initiative, in which we partnered as a government with faith-based organizations in order to help people coming out of prison, giving them a second chance in life, and encouraging foster care and adoption. And that's a ministry of faith, working with our faith-based institutions. It was called Restore Hope because hope is important. I like Ronald Reagan, and I think he had three characteristics that I admired in life. First of all, he was a consistent conservative. Jonathan Barnett remembers that. He was a consistent conservative, win or lose. He lost in 76. He won in 1980. And then he didn't change his values. And when he got elected, he became a pragmatic person. He had a Democratic Congress. He had to work with Tip O'Neill to get his economic package through. We have to work with people today to get things done. Look for common ground. The third characteristic was that you never heard Ronald Reagan be negative about the future of America. He was an optimist about our future. He believed in our future, and he conveyed that in his communication. And to me, hope is so important in Scripture, hope so important in our salvation, that we have hope through our Lord Jesus Christ. And so the faith gives us greater hope for what we can do now and how we can help people and make a difference. Now, you might say that today is a divided America. We're having challenges today that we've never experienced before. And it is true that we are a divided America. But you've got to think back in history that we have had times of division in our country all through our history. From the disputes between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the divide that they had. You go to the pre-Civil War era and the divide that we had on the expansion of slavery, and then the war. You go fast forward into the time period of the pre-war time when we were divided as to whether the United States should lead globally. In my generation, it was the Vietnam War, division. It was the Civil Rights Movement, division. And so we've had times of division throughout our history. The difference between then and now is that we've always in our country had leaders that tried to bridge the divide. And today, because of the internet, because of divided media, we have people making money on the divide, furthering the division. And it's critical that we give hope, that we give leadership that will heal the divide, that will bring people together versus furthering the divide. I believe that leaders should bring out the best of America, and that is what leaders should be doing. Today it's challenging. I hope that the next generation will look at public service, will look at the role of faith in our public service, and understand how it should drive us, define us, and make a difference. I'll end with the story that I love because it talks about someone very simple in life making a difference. Bill Crawford was the janitor at the Air Force Academy. He was a janitor. And he cleaned the bathrooms, he scrubbed the floor, he did the laundry, and he worked very quietly and humbly. The cadets passed him by every day, and they might say hi to him, as he did his chores, but didn't have much communication with him. And one night, one of the cadets was in the room reading the history of World War II and particularly the Italian campaign. And they read about a Bill Crawford who received the Congressional Medal of Honor because he took out German machine gun nests, 3 of them, by himself, single-handedly, to save his battalion. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor. And so the cadet turned to his fellow cadets who were studying and said, "Guess what, guys? I think we might have someone here, Bill Crawford. Could it be the same one?" And they said, "No way, no way." Next day, they go out there and they find Bill Crawford, and he's cleaning, and they say, "Are you the Bill Crawford that received the Congressional Medal of Honor?" And he paused for a moment, thinking, do I really want to open this up? And he says, "That was one day in my life a long time ago." The cadets built a relationship with that janitor, and one of the cadets wrote a book that said 7 lessons of leadership I learned from a manager here at the Air Force Academy. Humility, faith, relationships with others that make a difference in life and that make public service very joyful. Thank you very much.
Get to the fun part of the evening, have some questions and answers, hopefully. I'll use my prerogative here to ask the first question. And we have several questions already coming in, but feel free to continue to submit those via the Slido link and the code up on the screen. You'd mentioned that, we're living in a particularly contentious political environment, but, this isn't particularly new to American politics. I'm wondering, though, if you could speak to for Christians in the room and around the country, is there something different about today's contentious political environment that affords them opportunities for a more faithful political engagement that we maybe haven't had in the past?
The answer is yes. In today's world, the division happens because that's the nature of politics. But also it's enhanced because the nature of the media today that's also divided, and the information flow and the false information that goes to the internet. So it's much more difficult today. And so as Christians, we should, I say Christians have an obligation in democracy to participate, secondly, to educate, and thirdly, to tolerate. Those are the 3 things I believe that God demands of Christians today. And so it's the search for the truth and understanding the other point of view is important because it sharpens your mind as to why I actually believe this and where there's a disagreement, but also it's a matter of testimony as well. But search for the truth, and you're not always going to find it in the most easily accessible means. So I think that's an important part of it. And then participate, educate, and tolerate.
That's great. Questions are rolling in, so I'm just going to get right to it. So this is by the way, you can upvote these questions if you really want to get my attention on the app. So if you like a question, feel free to give it a thumbs up. When you ran for president, you offered a different vision for the Republican Party and the nation. What do you see as the future of that vision?
Well, it's not one that got you elected president. Now, if I had a crowd like this in Iowa, I might be president today. But the message that I had, obviously I'm running for president in a primary that says, the candidates that are running are better than Donald Trump. Obviously, the Republican voters said, no, we'd rather have Donald Trump. And so they spoke, and that's the election, and that's how it works. What's the message for the future? I believe that character counts, that truth matters, that the rule of law is important, and that we speak to unite people versus divide people. And so, what's the message for the future? It depends on where you are politically, perhaps, and what you want. But I think the United States has been blessed by God for a role in supporting freedom and democracy across the globe. And so that to me is important, and America's leadership is important, and America's goodness is important. Whenever you look at my dad, who served in World War II in the Japanese theater, and others that served in the European theater particularly, they went there, they saved the world from Nazism, they saved the world from oppression and authoritarianism. And then what did we do? We rebuilt Europe and Germany and Japan, and we didn't ask anything in return. We didn't ask for their mineral rights. We didn't ask for wealth return. It wasn't for us. It was because it was the right thing for America to do. And that's the America that I believe in. And so, that's not where we are in the Republican Party right now, but there's going to be a battle for our future and what kind of leadership we're going to provide for America, but also what does America mean for the world in the future? So obviously it's something I'm passionate about, and time will tell as to whether that message is important, whether it works, whether we continue down the current path or we go a different direction.
Okay. Do you think our political system, or as it exists today, does it allow for a stable middle ground, or is a cycle of overreach and backlash an unavoidable part of governance in the U.S.?
Well, structurally, we're set up for division. Structurally, we have congressional districts that are drawn to either super majorities for Republicans or super majority for Democrats. That brings them to the right, extreme right, or the extreme left, who's the most conservative, who's the most left, to win their primaries. And so structurally, we're not set up to bring healing. And then secondly, Congress is set up to reward those who win and not those who want to work together. So those things have to change, and there are structural changes that can be made. They're not easy, but they can be done. And so I think that there's always a pendulum in politics, and what we see happening now will shift in the future. It's just a question of how long and how we drive it. But I always come back to leadership matters, and that we have to have leaders that will try to bridge that divide. And we have many of those. They always don't get showcased, but we have many of those that really want to be able to work together, get things done. And let's see if we can magnify and expand those numbers.
Curious if you can point to an example or two of a leader, an elected official today who exemplifies or otherwise lives out this value of Christian witness in the public square. And maybe if you can point to someone, on both sides of the political aisle as people that you would encourage folks to look to as a good example of these things.
Well, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I started to make that one of my points, but I had too many points, so I deleted it. But, the walk of faith in public service causes you to keep an eye on others that have the same walk of faith. And it's very encouraging. And so, when Susan and I are in the White House, we got to dine with George W. Bush, President of the United States, in a small group. Usually you have the President of the United States that will have someone designated that he will call upon to pray. George W. Bush said, let's all pray. And he led us in prayer, just as casually and as a person of faith. That encouraged me. And, I think about people that I served with, from J.C. Watts, who is one of the best preachers you can imagine, from Oklahoma. He had a great walk of faith. Steve Largent, and today, there's, I think, on the other side of the aisle, Susan and I got to know the governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards, who's Catholic, but he's strong pro-life, and he got elected as a Democrat in a red state, and he signed pro-life legislation. And so he took a different path, and it showed a lot of courage on the Democratic side. And so, yes, there's examples on both sides. And, there's people that I can identify that I would say, man, that's left. But they're believers, and, we can pray together and we can disagree together.
That's good. People really want to know your perspective on this question. So you faced public opposition in recent years, including from people in your own party, as the party has changed a bit. How have you navigated that shift in your party as a lifelong Republican, going back to, even before you were nominated for U.S. Attorney?
Well, there's some people make a decision that I don't feel comfortable in the Republican Party. I want to be an independent. I look back at my history, and whenever I became active in politics, I was I was a part of the minority party. It's the Republican Party. And I helped build the Republican Party of Arkansas. And it's a little bit challenging. For example, I'll give you a real practical illustration of it. Here in Arkansas, we consistently had in our Republican platform that we should have nonpartisan election of judges. Judges should issue justice out with regard to politics, shouldn't have to identify with a party label. That was part of our platform. And in fact, we had all Democrat judges elected. And I had one case that it was a sort of a political case. I was representing the Republican Party, and we had a Democrat judge who was a Democrat and ran as a Democrat, and he ruled against us. I took it to the Arkansas Supreme Court, and they were all Democrats. And so I asked them all to recuse themselves. Guess what? They did. And I won the case. And so the point is that as a minority party, we were saying, let's have nonpartisan election of judges. That is flipped today, and now we're having a movement that we ought to have partisan election of judges again, that you have to run as a Republican or Democrat. And so from the standpoint of history, I have trouble seeing that shift. And, in a larger scale, the Republican Party was for free trade, was not for tariffs. We were for the free enterprise system. We were for less government. We were for America's leadership role in the world. And now we're making our allies, our adversaries. And so, yes, it is difficult for me to see the Republican Party that I identified with where it's going today. Now, that's what's great about a political party. You can have a debate within ourselves. So I'm going to have that debate. I'm going to be there. I'm going to engage, and we'll see what the future holds, and not for myself personally, but where the direction of our country goes. And so, what was the question?
I think it was, what are your thoughts?
Well,
how did you navigate this?
There you go. How I navigate it is I understand the cost. Whenever I said in the presidential debate in Milwaukee with 8 candidates on the stage, and they asked, whenever I said that I believe we have a candidate for president that's morally disqualified, I knew I was going to get booed, and I got booed. And, I did it because I thought we needed a choice. I did it because this is what I believed in the rule of law. And even though it's a minority view, minority views are okay in America. I'll give you an example of it because I believe in dissenting views and the importance of them sometimes. John Marshall Harlan is the only jurist, Supreme Court judge that dissented on Plessy v. Ferguson, which is a separate but equal doctrine. He dissented. He was in the minority. But over time, his dissenting opinion became the majority. And you can see that all through history. I was a dissenting member of the Republican. I was the Republican Party, so we were dissenting at that time against the Democratic majority. So I've been in the minority before, so I'm okay with it as long as I can speak my convictions.
So take a break from current events, current issues. Several people want to know, can we hear more about the, quote, terrorist group in the Arkansas hills?
Well, that was a time that some of us might remember. I see John Brown back there, who's been a really great friend and served our state so well. But I was a young United States attorney, and it was a time in the 80s in which the right-wing extremist group, which were white nationalists, that were neo-Nazi, that were using the scripture that I loved for nefarious purposes. And, for example, Richard Wayne Snell was a member of the CSA. He shot and killed a state trooper, Lewis Bryant in DeQueen. He killed a pawn shop owner in Texarkana because he believed he was Jewish. He was a very dangerous person. The whole camp was filled with that kind of trained men that were ready for the battle with the feds called Armageddon. And James Ellison, the leader of the group, prepared them for this, intended to fight. They had anti-aircraft weaponry in the compound. They had machine guns. They had grenades and grenade launchers. They had cyanide. They were prepared for an armed shootout with federal authorities. And so whenever we wanted to search the compound and arrest James Ellison, we wanted to get him off the compound. Whenever Trooper Liniger was shot and killed by one of the extremists in Missouri, James Ellison refused to come out. The FBI asked me to come up there, help negotiate the armed encampment, armed standoff. I did that. What surprised me was whenever I got out of the vehicle in the hills of Arkansas, they threw me a bulletproof vest and said, "You might need this." And I'm saying that's not why I went to law school. And but 3 days later, it was more dangerous than we thought inside the camp, but we successfully negotiated their surrender. I prosecuted them successfully. I came home after it was all over with, and Susan reminded me that we had a lot of people praying. And you contrast that, which was one of the most successful law enforcement operations in the history of Arkansas, with 200 law enforcement officers, SWAT teams from 5 states, the hostage rescue team there. It was just a short time later that you had the Waco disaster that we lost so many lives. And so it's just a reminder that calmness can work and be effective. And I think I provided that leadership then.
Turning to your experience as governor, what is your proudest accomplishment as governor?
That's an answer that ought to be easy. But if you had asked me that question after my 8 years, I might have given you one answer, because we're all concerned about our legacy. What's the legacy going to be? And I care about the legacy. But 2 years, 3 years after the fact, after I leave the governor's office, my thought on the legacy changes, because legacies can be short-lived. And so it's always about the impact on people. But I believe my greatest accomplishment was providing leadership in which I communicated, was honest with the Arkansas people, whether it was a pandemic or other threats that we faced or floods. or whether it was in trying to do something great for our state in computer science initiatives. So I think my greatest accomplishment was lowering the tax rate from 7% down to 4.9% and creating 100,000 jobs and lead us in the area of technology.
Moving back to more current issues, President Trump has in the past critiqued federal judges and judges who haven't necessarily ruled in his favor in certain cases. Today, he, or I guess earlier this morning, called for a judge who issued a negative opinion to be impeached, which led the Chief Justice to issue an interesting and very unusual statement, essentially pushing back subtly against this. Having served in the Department of Justice and, as a member of Congress and with the executive branch, I'm curious if you could kind of give us your perspective on this relationship, and not just with President Trump, but previous presidents too, and their relationship with the courts, and what you see that relationship looking like moving forward, especially if there's increasing tensions between the executive and judicial branch.
Well, to President Trump's credit, he has taken every step to follow the orders of the court. They'll appeal, but they have not laid down the gauntlet and said, we're not going to obey the order of the court. So that's the current status. Now, the concern is, just like he said today or yesterday, saying that somebody gives a contrary ruling ought to be impeached. Of course, he's referring to what he would consider a opposition judge, which is a Democrat judge. And Justice Roberts, of course, rebuked him for that. Here's the concern: that he believes in a unified executive branch, which means that he has the ability to fire anybody in the executive side, even if Congress sets some protections against them, like for whistleblowers. And the Supreme Court's decision giving him immunity, giving a president of the United States immunity even for illegal acts, really, really means something to Donald Trump. And so he believes in the power of the executive, and much of that I applaud him for. Any president, any governor wants to make sure that the executive branch is competitive and is strong, and he's done that. But there's going to be a test, and it'll come through the Justice Department. And he's already violated every normal standard whenever the White House directed that Eric Adams' criminal case be dropped. That is never done. You have this wall of separation between the White House and the Justice Department. That is gone. And the question will be, whenever he tells them to do something and the Justice Department doesn't want to do it, whether they will do it, whether they resign, and then the Republican senators as well. I do think there's a line that they will never cross, which is disobeying an order of the court. I think the Republican senators will say, no, you can't do that. And so I think there's some protective measures in place, and we'll see. That'll be the tension to watch. The courts, his relationship with the courts, and his relationship with the Justice Department.
Speaking of, current issues that's central to President Trump's agenda right now, there's a question here about immigration and migrant policies. I'm curious, being a governor of a state that it doesn't have a border with a foreign nation, but still concerned about certain aspects of illegal immigration, for example. What would the sweet spot look like for, say, the Republican Party in your mind on immigration policy in the United States?
When you talk about immigration policy, you have two great values of America that's in conflict. One is the value of compassion. We all value the immigrant history that America has and the contribution that immigrants make to America. And so we have that compassion, particularly when they come here for economic reasons. but you balance that, and it's in conflict with our second great value, which is the rule of law. I'm a former prosecutor. I slide down on the side of the rule of law. I think Donald Trump has done much of what is needed and been very successful in cutting off that illegal flow coming into our country, and it's through tough positions. Obviously, and I read his immigration executive order. I can't hardly disagree with any of it. The problem is how it's implemented, and the use of Gitmo could be challenging. There's some areas that you can cross there. What's the sweet spot for Republicans? It is to increase the legal opportunity for immigrants to come to America and recognize their contribution. And the sweet spot is rhetoric, to actually say it, not to demonize immigrants, but to recognize their contribution and to value them and respect that. And then the part of that sweet spot is simply making sure that we protect our border and have an orderly process. But the rhetoric, the words you use are critically important.
There's a couple of really great questions here I'm going to save to the end. One question, speaking especially of the next generation, what are some right motivations to get into politics, and what are some wrong motivations?
Well, it's really not any different than your motivation as a Christian to do anything. I mean, you can do it for the right motives and the wrong motives, but the right motives for getting into politics is public service, serving the public. That is the definition of why you are in the arena. And if you're in there for self-promotion, if you're in there to make money, if you're in there because you need a job, if you're in there for a whole host of other reasons that revolve around you, then that's problematic. It was a difficult time in our state, and some people went to jail for this, but one legislator came to me and was wanting me to put some money into his favorite projects. And I said, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. I mean, it was just a bad idea. And he said, that's difficult because I got elected so I could help my friends, and you're not letting me help my friends. That's a wrong motive. It's also a criminal motive. But, it's public service. It's public service. It's serving the public.
I think we'll conclude with these two very related questions. Well, no, we'll actually have one other question before the end. What book should a young student who aspires to be a lawyer read? Like, what are some good reading material for someone who wants to get into the legal profession?
Well, any book on history, if you learn history, that's helpful. But to get in the legal profession, you need to be able to communicate. And most people think about communicating orally. Communicate in writing. It's sort of a lost art. And learn, I would love, whenever I hired somebody in the governor's office, I would give them a writing test. I want to see your writing samples. Writing is critically important. But in terms of history, I would tell you to read The Great Dissenter on John Marshall Harlan. It'll tell you about the history of a dissenting judge, but also it tells you some incredible stories just about a difficult time in our society. I'd tell you to read Young Troublesome Men. It's a story about Winston Churchill's friends who are members of Parliament in the minority, and they helped Winston Churchill win. But they were troublesome young men in the Parliament. They were dissenters. They were minority. And they were not creating their own path to be leaders. They're creating a path for Winston Churchill to do it. So those are the books, to me, lawyers should read, because it reinforces conviction and principle and what you're in the fight for justice about. Those are the books to read. Because I just believe in standing for something. Winston Churchill William Manchester has like a 6-volume history on Winston Churchill. One of the volumes' name is The Alone Years. The Alone Years. And that's important for lawyers to recognize. If you have an unpopular client, if you're going against the grain, you can be alone sometimes and stand for conviction.
We are at a university where we have the privilege of teaching young people and preparing them for a variety of vocations and careers. What would you say to college students and soon-to-be graduates who want to be actively engaged with and represent their local community, to put down roots in a community? If we have people moving to Arkansas to attend John Brown but then stay in the area, how would you counsel them to plant roots, get connected, and initially find those pathways to serve?
Volunteer in a charitable or a community organization. They need people. They need financial support. They need help with fundraisers. They also need help with clothing drives or whatever else might come up. And that's how you engage in a community and you get to know people. Secondly, get involved in a campaign. You don't have to run, but let me tell you, every campaign needs volunteers, and it could be for state representative, it could be for city council, it could be for school board. Volunteer in a campaign, and you will learn the community and the issues. And part of that, here's the best advice I can give somebody who wants to volunteer. Campaigns are disorganized, and don't get discouraged because you volunteer and you say, well, nobody's knocking down my door or nobody's coming back to me and telling me what to do. Be persistent, be there, show up, understand how much they need you, but they're disorganized. And so those are 2 ways.
Great. Governor, thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you all for coming and for your questions. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
It's been a joy. Thank you. Good. That's good. Great interview. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. For some people, what time is it?
Well,